Hello everyone, welcome to this edition of Envera Byte at the board. Today we're going to be talking about annual emission reports. More specifically, we'll be talking about the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why when it comes to these reports. Now personally, I like to start any discussion about annual emission reports by a quote Benjamin Franklin. And the quote went like this: "In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." And as a practicing air quality professional, I like to add a third thing to the list, and that is annual emission reports. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's get started. An annual emission report is simply an emission inventory of your facility. Now what that means is that an annual emission report is an accounting exercise to determine the types and amounts of air pollutants emitted by all the pieces of equipment at your facility. Now within the AQMD, you'll not only have to identify and quantify these emissions, but you will also have to pay fees against these emissions. And those fees is something that we'll talk about down here in section 5. But for right now, it's important to know that an emissions inventory is simply an accounting exercise to know how much and what are the types of air emissions coming out of your facility. Now, within the AQMD, not all emission types need to be accounted for on the AER. In fact, there are certain types of emissions that don't need to be accounted for. For example, on-road and off-road vehicles. That means passenger cars, tractors, cranes, and so forth. Those emissions are considered to be mobile source emissions and don't need to be reported on your AER. Next, you have state registered equipment, more specifically portable equipment that is registered under the California or State Portable Equipment Registration Program, or called PERP. And then the third type, and there are more, I'm only highlighting 3 of them here, there's certain types of architectural coatings. And the key word is certain, because depending on how the architectural coating is used will dictate whether or not that material needs to be reported on your AER or not. For example, architectural coatings that are really used to paint buildings and walls and sidewalks don't need to be reported. However, if those paints and architectural coatings are used within the manufacturing process, then yes, they would need to be reported. And so it's important when you're preparing your annual emission report to know what types of equipment that you have on site, and then more specifically of those types of equipment types, which equipment types are exempt from reporting. And that requires a little work, a little bit of research, and we'll have some links to the presentations put on by the Air District that goes into the specific types of emission sources need to be reported on your AER on the bottom of this video. So that really covers what is an AER. Now let's move into the who, or who needs to file an AER. Generally speaking, the applicability to the AER program follows three criteria. Number 1, if you receive a notification from the Air District asking you to prepare an AER, then you have to prepare one. So number 1 is any facility that receives a notification from the Air District. Now, some people, and we've seen this in the past, have received notifications, but then their emissions are actually below the reporting thresholds, which we'll get to in a little while. And so they get confused, and they tell themselves, well, I received the notification, but my emission levels are below the thresholds, therefore I don't have to report. Actually, if you receive a notification, you have to report regardless of your emission levels. So number 1, again, is any facility that receives a notification from the AQMD that is asking them to submit a report regardless of their emission levels. Number 2 is any facility subject to the state's or California AB 2588 program for air toxics. And so if you're subject to that program, you need to file an AER. And then more commonly, we see that people become subject to the AER reporting simply because they have emissions that are over the thresholds or the reporting thresholds of the program. And what those thresholds are, they're 4 tons per year for NOx or nitrogen oxides, SOx or sulfur oxides, VOCs, or that's volatile organic compounds, or PM, particulate matter, and then there are 100 tons per year for carbon monoxide. And so again, this third piece is where we see most facilities get pulled into the AER reporting program. Number 3, let's talk about when does an AER need to be filed. An AER needs to be filed 60 days after the first of each calendar year. Now, the 60th day can fall on weekends or just so happen on a Monday when the AQMD is closed. Therefore, you need to check the AQMD's website to know when is the exact deadline of the AER. Sometimes it will not be on the 60th day, it will be a day or a few days later, but it's important to check the AQMD's website so you know of the exact deadline that you need to get these reports submitted in time. Now, if you submit these reports after the deadline, you'll obviously be subject to penalties, and those penalties will continue to rise the later or longer and longer you take to submit that report. So you really want to get this report submitted on time. Number 4, let's talk about where to submit the AER. The AER is an electronic report. That means that you use the AQMD software to submit your report. Most times you will prepare your report on a spreadsheet, transfer the numbers from the spreadsheet to the reporting tool, and then go ahead and press submit on the reporting tool, and then the report will be submitted. Now, again, the AER is an electronic report. But just because it's an electronic report doesn't mean that there isn't a hard copy component to it. There actually is a hard copy component to it. And so the full submission also includes this hard copy submission as well. And this hard copy submission is where you'll submit your check if you had fees due, and then you'll need to submit a signature on the forms that are generated by the reporting tool. And so how this works is that you'll take your data, put it into the reporting tool, press submit. The reporting tool will generate a set of forms for you. You'll take those forms, you'll print them out, you'll get your responsible official to sign as a wet signature, and then you'll take those wet signature copies plus your check, and then you will mail that to the AQMD. And so when you submit electronically, it's only half of the submission. You actually need to report electronically, plus you need to do your hard copy submission. Moving along, to use the reporting tool, you have to register for an account. Last year, the AQMD actually changed their reporting tool, and so the way that you register and the way you get access to the reporting tool is a little different. And we'll have links to documents, guidance documents put on by the AQMD for this new system below this video. So you'll register for an account. Once you have an account and you have access to the reporting tool, you'll then go ahead and submit or input facility specific information, operating time, what is it that you do, where's your facility located, who's the responsible official, who's the local contact. There's a whole list of things that need to be put into this reporting tool when you first log on. Once you do that, then what you'll do is you'll actually take and input the facility specific data that will be used to calculate emissions from your facility. And so once you do that, what will happen is that the reporting tool will actually in real time calculate these emissions, and then at the end what you want to do is you want to verify that the amount of emissions that are calculated from the reporting tool is equal to the amount of emissions that you calculated separately on the spreadsheet. And that check is a really good way to know that the emissions that you're submitting to the AQMD is accurate, and it can be backed up with documentation, because you should be preparing these calculations outside of the reporting tool and having a file of all your backup documentation in case you're asked to submit those. Once you do that, you'll have to verify that everything is correct and all the required fields have been filled. And then once you do that, you'll have to submit your report online. Again, the report submission online is just one piece of it. There's actually an electronic submission and then a hard copy submission, like we said before, that includes a wet signature and checks, or a check in case you have to pay money to the AQMD. Lastly, let's talk about why AERs are needed. Now, there's a number of reasons why AERs are needed aside from the fact that it's required by Rule 301, but more importantly, the AERs provide the AQMD with the data needed to develop rules and or control strategies to lower or reduce or improve air quality within the area. The only way that they can do that is by having data from all the facilities within their jurisdiction at their disposal, where they can look and slice and dice the data to see where more regulation is needed or where new controls are needed to reduce air pollution. Another reason is that it generates revenue. Like I said before, the annual emission report is an emission inventory from your facility, but we also talked about you have to pay fees based on the emissions from your facility. So if you have a high amount of emissions, you can expect to pay a lot of fees. If you have a low level of emissions, likewise, you can be expected to pay a smaller amount. But the more you emit, the more that you pay, and so that's a revenue stream for the air district, and they use this to make projections on their operating budget and so forth. Again, the AER is required by Rule 301. The AER data is also used to track progress to the NAAQS, or the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, which is sort of the measuring stick of how well air pollution or the air quality in Southern California is improving. And so right now our levels, are actually above the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, but they're actually lower than they were 20 years ago. But again, the levels of emissions reported by these facilities are used by the AQMD to determine their progress to achieving that National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Another reason why AERs are needed is that it allows the AQMD to verify compliance with certain rules and regulations requiring facilities to keep below a certain emission level. And so if you have one of these conditions on your permit, and more specifically, if you have a condition in your permit that limits the emissions from your facility to below a certain level, then when you submit your AER, obviously you want to be sure that the number that you're going to report to the district is actually below the number in your permit, so that you don't inadvertently give yourself a violation for reporting or for exceeding your emissions limit. And so you want, again, AERs are needed to verify compliance with rules. And then lastly, it's used to determine rule applicability. And namely, it's for Title V applicability and reclaim applicability. And these two programs are two very large programs here in the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And applicability to those programs are based off of data submitted on your annual emission report. And so, for example, for reclaim applicability, if you report NOx or SOx emissions in excess of 4 tons per year, then you'd be subject to the reclaim program, and then that would trigger a whole series of events or requirements that you would need to comply with. And then likewise, for Title V, if you report VOC emissions over 10 tons per year, VOC is one of the pollutants, but there are other ones that have thresholds or Title V thresholds associated with it. But more commonly, VOC emissions over 10 tons per year will get you subject to Title V. And so again, the AQMD also uses the AER data to track applicability to rules. And so there you have it, the very basics of the annual emission reports provided to you or given to you in the who, the what, the when, the where, the why. And now you should know why there are actually 3 things in life that are certain: death, taxes, and annual emission reports. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Envera at the Board. We'll see you soon.